Hi everybody, welcome to this very special event tonight, hosted by Formula One in collaboration with Girls on Track UK. I'm extremely excited to be hosting. I'm Helena and I've actually been part of the Girls on Track UK community ever since it began. So it's absolutely amazing to be here. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. You will be on mute throughout the session. That's just so we can hear the speakers. And the event is also being recorded as well. Feel free to turn your camera off if you don't want to be seen, or leave the chat if you're not comfortable with that. So why are we doing this? Formula One is on a mission to improve diversity and inclusion. You've got things like the We Racers One campaign that kickstarted last year, and it's just an incredible opportunity to have some incredible women that work in Formula One with us tonight. So without further ado, let's introduce tonight's guests. We have Louise Young with us, who is legal counsel. So she's in the legal department at Formula One. And we also have Sophie Kiss, who is digital licensing executive and is part of the digital sector. So let's get cracking. So Louise, we'll come to you first. Can you just outline your role? And tell me a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Helena. So I am one of the lawyers employed at Formula One, and the particular department that I work on, or the business team I work with, is called Race Promotion. So that's our business team that deals with all of our promoters of events around the world. So that's in each territory we have a team of people that we work with that own and operate a circuit. So we work on all the contracts with them, the maybe government arrangements that are needed to get a race off the ground. If there's circuit upgrade works that are happening at a circuit, all of that needs to be regulated, controlled and contracted, and that's what I do and the lawyers in my team.
Fantastic. And before I throw over to Sophie, throughout the session, there'll be lots of opportunities to ask any questions that you would like to be answered. So just pop it into the chat and make sure you ask everybody, and we will do your best to get through as many as possible. Don't be too afraid or too shy. No question is too silly. Pop it in and we'll get it answered for you. So Sophie, very similar question. Basically, what is your role?
Yeah, thanks, Helena, and hi, everyone. So I'm on the, as Helena said, the digital team, F1 specifically, digital licensing. So I guess I was new to the licensing world when I started this job. So for anyone who doesn't know, I guess a quick background on licensing and how it works is, say a brand like Formula One doesn't necessarily have the resource to go and create a load of products, such as games or clothing, branded clothing and things like that. So the premise of licensing is that we'll give other brands permission or rights to use the F1 brand and create products for us. So specifically in the digital space, and what my main remit is to look after our gaming partnerships. So we work with a few games developers, all around the world actually, to give them rights to use the Formula One brand and the Formula One team brands and create Formula One games. So I don't know if anyone's aware, but we've got our main PlayStation game, the Formula One 2020 game. That's all those accounts of what I kind of manage on a day-to-day basis. So yeah.
And have you had a play?
I have. I've had almost 3 years doing this now, and my skills have definitely improved. So my first Grand Prix that I went to, I actually had to go at the simulators that we have in the fan zone, and I crashed at the first corner, and the announcer called it out and highlighted it to everyone. But safe to say, I have improved since then. So that is good.
That's good to hear. Louise, we'll go back over to you. You've both got fascinating jobs, and obviously it's fantastic that they both vary so much. Louise, what do you find yourself doing sort of Monday to Friday and obviously across the weekends? What are your main roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, I like to joke, Helena, that my to-do list looks more like a travel itinerary than lawyers' work. So, it might be talking to the team in Australia about how they're going to manage the COVID situation and our entry and safe operations at that event. It might be negotiating a new race deal in an exciting new city that we want to take the brand. It might be helping a promoter fix an issue that arose during an event, or helping them work on a health and safety matter that's come up at a particular event. It's a whole wide range of legal issues that come up for us.
Fantastic. And in that silly question, but are 2 days ever the same?
No, I guess not. There's some rhythm, I guess, to our calendar cycle. And so, like Sophie, I've been around for nearly 3 years, and heading into another season, you do get into a bit of a rhythm. You get to know what the challenges might be in a particular jurisdiction, or what extra preparation might be needed before we go somewhere. But yeah, lots of variety for sure.
Fantastic. And Sophie, what about you? What's sort of the first task for you when you come into the office on a Monday morning?
Good question. Definitely varies week to week. I think the main thing that I'll do is on the gaming program. So I'll work with all of our partners in that area. Similar to Louise, they're based in Australia, the UK, America. So it's working with them to, I guess, make sure that we're creating good games, making these games exciting for fans, and then kind of coordinating what they're doing with the internal teams at F1. So working with the F1 marketing team or social team to make sure that we're promoting these products, making fans aware of them, getting fans playing them. So yeah, no, not as legal as what Louise would do, but yeah, a bit more on the, I guess, like the creative side of things, and managing how that all works.
And how many people are in your team? How many people do you work with directly? And I guess it obviously relates to lots of different areas of the business. So yeah, how many people do you liaise with?
Yeah, my actual team is lightweight. There's only 3 of us. So we look after digital licensing, and then also experiential licensing, which my colleague manages. So that's things like licensing our IP to theme parks, for example, to create a Formula One ride. So there's 3 of us there, but then we're part of the commercial partnerships team. So we work with, or the wider team rather, is everyone from sponsorship to digital ad sales. And then, as I said, yeah, we liaise with the marketing team. We'll work closely with the legal team as well. So it's quite nice in that you get to deal with lots of different people from lots of different departments every day, and I guess get involved with and learn about things that fall outside of your main role, which is always exciting.
Amazing. And you touched on it earlier about licensing, but for those that don't know, I guess, what's the value of it, and why is it so important to Formula One?
Great question. So I guess for a brand like Formula One, we are obviously experts in the sport, and we, as Louise touched on, we we can create a race calendar. We've got a motorsport team who are they form the regulations, and then we work with the Formula One teams to get a sport on track. But all the activity, I guess, away from a race weekend, we don't necessarily have the resource to do that. And that's where licensing is a really powerful tool, because we have an amazing brand in the form of F1, and licensing allows us to go to, in my case, a games developer and get them to create a game about F1. And I guess in creating these new products, you can then reach a whole host of new fans across different mediums. So I obviously do the gaming stuff, but we have a consumer products licensing team as well. So they'll create things such as, clothing, F1 merchandise, all different accessories such as phone cases. We've got some really cool posters. And so it just allows us to, as I said, we're a small team, 3 people, but we can license the rights to these partners and then have a whole suite of products available to fans. So it just allows you to do a lot more, which is very useful.
So interesting, and never realized just how big the scope is of a project. Going back to you, Louise, how big is your legal team, and how many of you are there, and what sort of different roles are there?
There's a pretty big in-house legal team, Helena. There's about 30 of us that work across different areas. So a few lawyers in my team that do the race promotion work. Then there's some that focus on sponsorship, work more closely with Sophie's team on licensing deals, broadcast, and we have a trademarks department and sort of corporate lawyers who deal with all of the business of F1 and the F1 companies. So it is quite a big team.
Amazing. And what would you say the biggest challenges? Obviously, with the pandemic, things have been turned on the head, upside down and back to front. So how much has your role adapted over the past year?
Yeah, we've had a really wild ride in the last 12 months, as people probably have seen. So we started 2020 in Melbourne on the eve of the first race of the calendar. And as everyone probably knows, sadly, that race didn't go ahead. And that was the point when the world basically bunkered down, everyone went home and took shelter until we knew what the pandemic really meant. But work didn't stop for us in the legal team at that point. That was really when we all got going with our commercial colleagues to work out what the rest of the season would look like. So we were very lucky that conditions did improve in Europe, and we were able to start racing in July in Austria in 2020. So my role then was talking to each of the countries that I work with to help shape what our arrangements were going to look like for 2020, what changes we needed to make, what extra help and support we needed from them, and how we could change our operations to be a bit leaner, to be a bit lighter in terms of the people that travelled, and how we could get the season started. So it really was a wild ride in 2020 that we lost a couple of races in that those territories weren't able to have us enter because their conditions weren't safe for us to operate, or governments were more conservative than others. But then that also opened up a whole path for us to bring in old races or new races that hadn't been on the calendar in recent years, and that gave us an opportunity to do different types of arrangements, different deals, places that we couldn't race in a regular year. It really opened up the scope of the opportunities for us to race in unique locations in 2020. Looking to 2021, we hope it's going to be a more normal year. We have already had a first change to the calendar, which is to move Australia to the back half of the calendar in November, given the COVID conditions there. But we're hoping to have a relatively normal calendar other than that change at the beginning.
Yeah, I think I speak on behalf of everybody when I say that to actually go racing last year was fantastic, and it was such a good calendar with so many surprises in it. So it was great to see. This leads nicely into a question from Carl that we've had, and he asks, how has the pandemic impacted legal contracts and clauses? I know obviously you can't talk about specifics, but can you just give an idea of how much it has impacted?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of our contracts provided for what would happen in these types of scenarios. So it wasn't exactly a surprise. Of course, it was an unforeseeable thing, but our contracts are pretty robust and gave us a path forward. But I think the most important thing has been the relationships with our partners and stakeholders. And, you know, sometimes having a contractual answer isn't the most important thing. It's your relationship with your counterparty and how you work together and overcome whatever that challenge is, despite what the legal answer might be.
Absolutely, great answer. And Sophie, we'll go back to you now. And so in the run up to events and sort of big launches, how does your work pattern change, and what are the main things you have to prepare for example, in launch of a game or launching in a new territory?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of the year is spent focusing on the development side of things and making sure that, you know, in the case of 2021, for example, that we've got the 2021 calendar going in game, we've got all of the new team assets going into the game, and working on that side of things. So I think from a leading up to launch, it always gets a bit more exciting because it's a case of seeing everything that you've been working on for the past 9 to 12 months start to come to life in the form of trailers, or back before the pandemic hit in the form of activations, whether it was at games conferences or Grand Prix, and just I think it's always very rewarding when you see that stuff come to life. It's always a very exciting time. But it's, I guess, fairly high, the pressurized situation, I guess, because I feel like no matter how much you prepare for these types of things, there's always last minute things that come up that you've got to manage. And I guess, yeah, that's what I've learned probably over the last 3 years here, is there's always seems to be a solution for everything, even if it comes up last minute. So yeah, it's good. I do enjoy it. And I guess just back to your earlier point, Helena, it's very much a kind of like a seasonal cycle. And what's nice about it is everyone a lot of the time focuses on the start of the year and like the first race of the year, but the games always launch mid-year. So I'm kind of, I don't necessarily match everyone else's seasonal cycle. So that's nice as well, because gives, I guess, everyone something to look forward to mid-season.
Great. And for those that don't know, what is an activation, and how do you explain that?
Yeah, so I guess again, I'll focus on gaming because that's my area of expertise. But we have the games and they're available on the App Store. You can buy them in shops, but a lot of the time, the focus of, I guess, F1 and also our gaming partners is to get the game in front of more people, and activations are, I guess, a marketing initiative where you set up a physical, you have a physical setup. A lot of the time with F1, it involves gaming simulators, so like a steering wheel and pedals. You have the game there, and then you can give people, you know, free access to come and participate in the game. Every now and then you can get, you know, key figures, influencers, sometimes drivers involved, just to build up excitement, and it really helps. It's definitely a marketing focused thing, so it helps build excitement and bring more eyeballs to the game, and hopefully bring in more players.
Who's the best driver that you've witnessed play the game?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like during lockdown, gaming really boomed, which is exciting, and there are a lot of the drivers actually playing the game. I think in the end, George Russell came out on top, but I know that him and Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, they all had a good fight, but I think it was George in the end. He won our virtual Grand Prix, so I'll go with George.
Good choice. Good choice. Louise, we'll go back to you now. And we've had quite a few questions in. Do you get to travel with your role?
Yeah, I have been to quite a few races and also travel outside of races when a particular piece of work means we need to be with that promoter team. I actually had an experience recently where we had a whole new race deal done virtually, like over Zoom, as we are now, that's really changed the dynamic of how much we can achieve remotely, as well as by, you know, being there in person and seeing people face to face. But yeah, I have done a bit of travel. I've been to China. Was a really great experience to see their circuit, and we were also really fortunate to have a fan festival in 2019 in downtown Shanghai, which was one of the first times the streets in Shanghai had been closed for that type of event. So that was a really big conquest for us to run cars down the main street of downtown Shanghai. And like Sophie was talking about, taking F1 to new audiences is a big part of that sort of festival's marketing program.
Fantastic. And same question for you, Sophie. Do you get to travel with your role as well?
Yeah, there is a bit of travel involved. I think it ties back to the activations that I was talking about before. There's always, with the sport like F1, key markets where we want to be going and running activations. So I get a bit of traveling done there, but I think as well, away from the actual sport, we focus on games conferences as well. So that's exciting because it's a whole different industry to sport and what I see with F1 day to day. So that's fun as well, I guess, because it's a completely different experience and a good way to keep an eye on our competitors as well.
Yeah, competitors. Just for those that have joined the chat, with us tonight, we've got Louise Young, who is legal counsel at Formula One, and also Sophie, who is digital licensing executive. We've had lots of great questions, so please do keep them coming in, and you can pop it on Speaker View as well to get the best experience. And just once again, ladies, thank you so much for joining us and talking with us tonight. Let's go for another question. So we'll talk a bit more now about how you got into the sport and your role. So we'll go with, well, actually, first of all, you're obviously both from Australia. So the school system may be a bit different over there, but what subjects did you take at school to get into your roles? And I guess the overarching question is, did you even study a subject related to what you do now?
Is that for me?
Yeah, we'll start with you, Louise.
Okay, sure. Well, I started life in a slightly different place, and that was in a big law firm. And I can actually see one of my former colleagues from that firm has joined tonight. So hello, Tay. So I did a law degree at university, which had no particular focus about motorsport or an area of expertise in law. Even it was, a general law qualification. I spent 5-ish years in a law firm and found myself in a construction practice. And construction law probably sounds like a fairly specific discipline and not that well related to motorsports, but I always knew that I wanted to work in sport in some way, shape or form, and had kind of thought, oh, that's not going to happen for me because I'm just a lawyer and I'm now working in this big corporate law firm and nothing about what we do here involves sport or, anything interesting. I'm working on buildings and pipelines. Like, sport's not going to be my path. But I was lucky enough to secure a role with the Commonwealth Games Organising Committee when that was held on the Gold Coast in 2018. So they needed some support on the construction side, and that was exactly what I could do. So left the law firm and spent 2.5 years building temporary infrastructure on the Gold Coast, upgrading venues. We transformed an AFL stadium, which is Australian football for those who don't know, into the athletics stadium, which could then be multi-purpose, used as a multi-purpose venue throughout the games. It was the opening and closing ceremony venue. We could flip it backwards and forwards between events, and did a whole bunch of really unique and quite sustainable development there that disappeared after the game. So there was none of that white elephant type of thing that people talk about with Olympics. But after I finished with the Commonwealth Games, because obviously that has a limited time slot, it's in a city for a particular time period and then everyone moves on. During that work, I learned that there's this culture of gamers, as they call themselves, and they move from event to event around the world, like Olympics and FIFA World Cup, Commonwealth Games, all that type of thing. And these people develop skills that are transferable between events. Now, I knew I didn't want to be hunting down a job every 2 to 4 years or moving to a new city every 2 to 4 years, but I really wanted to stay in sport. So I started to look for ways that I could get a more permanent role in sport. And so that typically means being with a rights holder. So that's someone like Formula One or the IOC, the entities that have the rights to a particular event, rather than the city where the event is being held. Because as I touched on before, our calendar changes all the time. Those places and cities don't have a guarantee to be with us indefinitely. but the rights holders will always have their events and they can always host them. So the UK has a lot of major sporting organisations and rights holders, as does the US. And so I started talking to a number of organisations about how I could transition into their businesses and continue to work in sport using my legal skills. So I think the law part is just the tools that I use to be involved in sport. And, you know, that's something that every business needs. Equally, they need accountants or, you know, other sort of corporate disciplines. They need tax professionals, they need lawyers, they need accountants, they need all of those things to keep the wheels turning. So if you think you have an interest in one of those disciplines, I don't think that precludes you from then working in sport or motorsport in particular.
We've had a really good question in from Caitlin Wilcox, who says, what area did you qualify into and what is your primary area of expertise? I'm guessing it's obviously with the law sector, there is a set path that you have to go through, but just can you talk about some of the options as well in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So construction is really my background, and that was the path for me out of a law firm into an in-house role. But equally, IP lawyers are very highly regarded in the sports space because so much of our business is about, as Sophie said, licensing our intellectual property to partners, broadcasting, media, that type of world is really important for Formula One. Equally, there's some guys and girls who work in our team who are really traditional corporate lawyers who deal with financial reporting and tax and regulatory matters like that are sort of very straight down the line in terms of their qualification and training. So I think there's a wide variety of issues within law that come up that would make you a useful member of an in-house legal team.
Fantastic answer. It's great to learn a bit more about how you got to where you are today. Let's go back over to Sophie, and same question for you. What did you study at school? Did you go to university? And how did you end up working in Formula One?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm from Australia, but when I was 15, I moved over to Ireland, actually. I finished school there, and then I've been over this side of the world ever since. So I think I always knew that I wanted to work in sport. And I think back when I was coming out of school, I didn't necessarily know how I was going to achieve that. I knew that I wasn't an athlete and I wasn't ever going to play professional sports. So I had an interest in psychology, actually. And so I chose a psychology degree. And I think, it's a transferable degree, and you can, there's a lot of paths out of it. So I did my undergraduate in psychology, and then I went and did a master's in sports psychology, which obviously tailored my expertise into the sports world. But obviously, as you've probably gathered, I am not in a sports psych role. So when I finished uni, I started applying to jobs in London. So I was in Ireland at the time doing my master's, started applying to jobs in London, and got a graduate role at a sports marketing agency. So I was targeting commercial-based roles in the sports industry. Similar to Louise, I was looking at rights holders. I guess in England, you've got all types of leagues and actual teams in terms of individual football teams or rugby teams. And then there's this whole world, which I didn't really have much of a grasp on the agency side of things. So I guess a similar idea to licensing, but you have smaller leagues or teams that don't necessarily have the resource in-house to be selling their media rights or selling their IP in the licensing space. So they will have a deal in place with a sports agency who will do that for them. So I started working for, my first job out of uni was for a sports marketing agency on the media rights side of things. So we had the rights to sell the likes of the Six Nations, the FA Cup, so a few really cool sports leagues to sell their media rights to TV broadcasters. So that was my first role. It was on the research team, so looking at I guess performance metrics and reporting back to partners about the success of how their TV viewership was doing, how their social media reach was doing, and then I did that for about 2 years, and then I just started applying for jobs again because I wanted to look for something different, and that was when I found myself at F1. So a bit of a weird route, and I think it was all led by the fact that I knew I wanted to work in sport, and so I just tried to find a way to do that, and I'm very fortunate that I'm now in this role.
Oh, it's amazing. It's great to see how far your passion has got you, and how exciting it is what you're doing now. We'll go back over to Louise. We've had a question in from Liz, who asks well, firstly, she's a first-year law student in the US, and she's asked if there's any particular courses or work experience you'd recommend trying to get involved in, bearing in mind that she wants to work in Formula One legal.
Yeah, that's a good question, Liz. I think it's a couple of things. First is, finishing that law degree and getting qualified and getting some good, well-rounded experience under your belt. I think there's a number of practice areas you could target that will be useful to sort of sports organizations, which are things like intellectual property. If you're doing a dual degree alongside your law degree, elements of business and marketing will make you more useful as a lawyer that can understand those elements of a commercial proposition. But really, I think the most useful thing you can do is have a well-rounded experience. So at least the way it works in Australia is you can often train in a law firm and spend some time in different areas of their business and experience, some corporate work, some disputes work, some other sorts of transactional work. And it's really just thinking about what does a business need. So F1 obviously has a large contingent of employees. So maybe you want to be an employment law specialist. We help people build things. As you've heard, promoters will be doing circuit upgrade works. So if you can understand a construction schedule, that will make you useful. If you can read a balance sheet, that will help you deal with complex financial matters. So there's a whole variety of things that go into working in a sports organisation. So I think broadly.
Fantastic answer. And just a question that's coming from Victoria. She asks, what advice would you give to current law students aspiring to a career working in-house for F1? So is there a route that you can follow to join in-house as a trainee, perhaps, or what's the way in?
Yeah, we mostly are a team of qualified lawyers, so we've all had experiences elsewhere in firms or other businesses. But one way you can get experience as a junior person is paralegal work. We have a number of paralegals that work with us who are people who have maybe finished a law degree but haven't found a training contract, which is the process in the UK. I'd also say you should look at service providers around F1. So a team perhaps, sponsors, someone who supplies goods or services to F1. They're all really great ways to get to know the business, get to know the F1 world that isn't so specifically the F1 part of it.
Great answer, thank you. And Sophie, obviously your career now is very different to what you started out doing. How did you go about getting experience to begin with, and how important was your work experience and things like internships when applying for those roles and getting the jobs?
Yeah, I think I was very lucky in that I got a graduate role out of uni. So the expectations for my position were to not necessarily have a load of experience behind my belt. But in saying that, I did do a couple of internships over my university years, throughout my university years. And that was very much just reaching out to people in areas I was interested in, which at the time was sports psychology. So I worked for a couple of sports performance companies for the summers. But yeah, I think sometimes the hardest bit is getting your foot in the door. And I think, it's very daunting coming out of uni, not having a wealth of experience. But I think if you focus on graduate roles and other roles at that level, that's always a good place to start. And then once you're in a role that you're enjoying and able to learn from, then I kind of look now at my career as a step ladder, I guess. And my move from my previous job to F1 was a step up, and I'd look to, next time I had a role change, I guess, I look to step up again. So I think it's slightly different in that you don't necessarily, for a lot of commercial roles, need specific, like a specific degree. But I think any kind of work experience is normally useful. And yeah, I guess it very much depends on what you're interested in. If you're interested in sponsorship or commercial partnerships, it's potentially a bit different if you're interested in the digital side of things or the IT side of things. So I think if you are looking for internships, it's always good to look for them, obviously, in the area of interest that you want to work in. So yeah.
Great answer. And how important is it to make contacts as you go throughout your journey, and how do you even go about making contacts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think there's probably two parts to it. One part is just the general day-to-day contacts that you have with people in your business. So like my colleagues at F1, and then also all of the people that you work closely with on your partners' teams. So from my side, that's obviously a lot of people in the gaming industry, but as well, a lot of it I think is about being proactive and not only reaching out to people, but also if you're I guess if you meet people and want to build a relationship, you shouldn't hesitate, I guess, to reach out to them and speak. Very easy to meet someone one time and think, oh great, I know that person now, and then you never speak to them again. So I think particularly I guess being women in sport, it's always good to have peers who are women as well. And I know that like within F1, for example, where we all know each other quite well, which is good. And then if I leave F1, or if people that I work with leave F1, I guess it's just about keeping in touch with them. Doesn't have to be all the time, but I guess it's just never closing off the doors to relationships that you open. Yeah, would be what I'd say.
That's great advice.
The informal opportunities too, Sophie, like Helena, Sophie and I, with a number of our colleagues, played on a tag rugby team pre-pandemic, but things like that social opportunities that come up, I guess, and will come up in the future, you have to take those as much as the strictly professional ones, because we really built a great network of friends and other colleagues that I wouldn't have otherwise interacted with through those kind of social activities.
That's some really good advice from both of you. We're really lucky tonight that we've got people from lots of different countries that are tuning in. And obviously you're both from outside of the UK. So people have asked, how hard is it to get a job in Formula One? Obviously, the offices are sort of in London and Kent, for those of you that don't know. And how do you go about dealing with work permits and things like that?
Yeah, I don't know. Louise might be best placed to answer this. I'm very lucky in that my dad is Hungarian, so I am a dual citizen and have an EU passport and an Australian passport. So I'm probably not best placed to answer that one, but Louise, you might know more from a work permit point.
I am also a little bit lucky, not as lucky as Sophie, but have English grandparents. So that entitles me to live and work in the UK at least. So that made my passage much easier. And I think in general, applying for jobs in London, not to say you'd be excluded, but you'll be better placed if you do have already a right to live and work, because you'll have to ask the employer to do something extra for you if you don't. But I'd say for those people who are outside of the UK, motorsport is happening all over the world, and there's opportunities to be involved with local either karting or motorsport, that we race at 23, 24 different places. There's opportunities to be involved with those organisations as well, not just the rights holder. So all of those places around the world essentially act as organising committees in much the same way that Tokyo is now the organising committee for the Olympics. We could view each of the circuits where we race as a mini organising committee, and if there's one of those in your city or country, that's somewhere you can go to try to get involved in a different capacity.
That's a really good way of looking at it. We've had a question in from Sophie, and obviously we were talking about networking before, and she's asked about the importance of LinkedIn and whether there's any other networking platforms that are good for just making those initial connections or finding the people in the area of interest.
Yeah, my main platform from a professional perspective is definitely LinkedIn. I think it's quite user-friendly in terms of being able to search specifically for companies or industries. Obviously very easy to search for individual people if I know their names, but it's also I think a useful tool for industry news as well, which I guess you'd be surprised how much you pick up just from scrolling through LinkedIn. But I think that would be my main tool for networking purposes.
Fantastic. And what about you, Louise? Would you recommend LinkedIn? How important is it for you?
Yeah, I think it is a good place to build a professional network, and equally it's quite international and transportable. So if you do find yourself working in a number of different countries or cities, it is a great way to stay in touch with people. Definitely.
Amazing. Now, we've had a couple of fun questions coming in. So where has it gone? We've been asked, what is your favourite team and favourite driver? We'll start with you, Louise. Have you got a soft spot for somebody?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if Sophie and I are just going to have the same slightly patriotic answer.
I think we might. Is
there anyone other than Danny Rick that you're interested in? Yeah.
I must say, I this year really started to like Lando Norris. So the news of Daniel Ricciardo moving to McLaren, I think has made me a bit of a McLaren supporter going into 2021. So yeah, I'll be rooting for them, I think.
Fantastic. And what's the favorite part of your job, Sophie? We've had a question in from Chloe that's asked that. So if you had to pick one, which I know is probably really tough, what is it?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I think one thing that I do love about my job is the fact that I get to work with so many different departments. And I don't think I necessarily realized that when I came into it, but like in order to create a game, we obviously need contracts in place with partners. So I'll work with legal. We need to work with the sponsorship team, because if we want to replicate F1 and give fans an authentic experience, how do we integrate the sponsors into the game? I get to work with marketing and social to promote the games. And I think just the fact that you've got so many touch points with the whole business, I think is probably my favorite part. And that's probably influenced by the fact that I don't necessarily know exactly what my career path is going to look like. So it's a really good way for me to learn and be exposed to so many different parts of the business.
Yeah, that's a really good answer you've given. And Louise, Megan has asked, what's your favorite project that you've worked on or been a part of?
I've had some really challenging projects, and those have probably given me the most satisfaction. But I think the part that I like the most is dealing with different countries and the way they do business. Like speaking with the Italians and how emotive and passionate they are about particular things is completely different to the way the Germans are very serious and rule orient. And then recently I've worked a lot with our Brazilian team, and they're maybe somewhere in between, or I then have an easy connection with the Australians. So I think that kind of cultural variety that we have, or that we're lucky to have, is a really cool part of the F1 business, and sets it apart from like an Olympic model where they're just working in one city for 4 years or 7 years, depending on the cycle. And this really global nature of our business is probably the thing that I like the most.
That's great. And we've had a question from Eden that says, which country or circuit has the biggest amount of legal work surrounding it? Again, you might not be able to give specifics, but are there some that are tougher than others and more challenging?
Yeah, well, I can say when we race somewhere new, that always involves a bigger investment of time, both to help our promoter come up to speed with the way we do things, as well as for us to understand how that country's regulations might work, or politically what the attitude is to a new race coming to that city. So probably new races will take more time and effort across the whole business, not just legal, but from all the different departments.
Great, that's a really good answer. And Sophie, we'll go back to you. Obviously, it's no secret that the sports industry and motorsport as a whole is very much a male-dominated area. Thankfully, we've got projects like Girls on Track UK that are hoping to inspire more women get into the area. But what would you say to somebody just starting out and wanting to get involved in the sport?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in my current role, I've kind of got two industries that are both male dominated. I think from a gaming point of view as well, there's definitely plenty of times where I'll be in meetings and I look around and realize that I am the only woman in the room. But I think I would say that sports in general, all levels of it, whether that's like professional athletes and sports teams, right through to the stuff that I would do in a commercial role, right through to the stuff that Louise would do. And then I guess in the world of F1, you've got the very engineering, mathematical, technical aspect of it as well. But I think that more and more women are entering this space. And so I think, from the outside, it might look like it's something that isn't achievable, but I would not let that phase you. I think over the next few years, there's obviously an increased focus on diversity. And I think in F1 as well, you've got not only the initiatives that F1, the company, are working on, but you've got a lot of advocates. I think earlier in the 2020 season, Lewis brought, I think her name was Stephanie, up onto the podium. And so you've got people who are, championing women and just, I guess, making it seem more accessible. Because I think the biggest thing is looking at it and seeing not very many women around. So I'd suggest, or I'd advise to not let that phase you, and to pursue what you want to do, because I think increasingly there's always going to be space for that.
That's a really good idea. Louise, you've come from a construction background of things, which is very male dominated as well. How important was it for you having role models and people you could look up to?
Yeah, definitely. I probably have had a few influential female colleagues along the way that have helped me get where I am now. And although there's sort of a perception of there not being many women in F1, at least in our London office, there is a really strong contingent of women. There's more female lawyers than male lawyers, purely by accident, I'm sure. But equally, our general counsel is female. There's a number of directors in our business who are female. So yes, there's certainly plenty of opportunities in these kind of more corporate roles, maybe, that they're the types of roles and work that have appealed to women traditionally. And hopefully there'll be an increasing presence on those technical and sort of STEM related roles in the future.
Brilliant. And what would you say the most, sorry, I should say we've had a question in from Lena, and she says, what are the most important professional and personal skills needed for your role?
Well, other than your professional qualification, as in to be a lawyer, having that part sewn up, probably it's something around your interpersonal skills, the ability to listen, to negotiation is a large part of my role. Having empathy, I think, to understand your counterparty's point of view. That, as I say, some people come to F1 with a lot of passion, and we need to find compromise or solutions. I think, on a race weekend, there'll be issues that come up that seem like not a deal breaker, but a really big headache or a really big problem. And we've, that Melbourne example aside, we've not cancelled races, that they always happen. We had a typhoon hit Japan in 2019, which washed out proceedings on Saturday, but we got a race away on Sunday. So it's maybe thinking outside the box, a bit of creativity, problem solving, those kind of soft skills outside of what might be a technical, like professional qualification or your degree study. I think you can work on those soft skills quite a lot too.
Great. And what about circuits where the main language isn't English? So Via's asked, do you hire translators? Or is it important for you to have a second language if you're looking at working in a global sport?
Yeah, it's certainly valued. We do most of our work in English, and we're very fortunate that our partners that we work with are able to converse with us in English, but having another language, and there's lots of people in our business that have 3, 4, 5 languages under their belts. So yes, absolutely, it's a useful skill to have, but not essential. I think it's probably a bit of a curse of being Australian and living so far away from everything else. Learning another language isn't so essential the way it is for Europeans when it's on your doorstep. So I don't have another language skill, but it's certainly highly regarded.
Great. Sophie, Nadine has asked, what important factors are there to focus on when you're having an interview? When you have sort of an interview for your dream job or something similar, how would you go about preparing for it? And have you got any tips?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a couple of things that I would think about going into an interview. The first thing would be to know the job description, because I think the more you know the job description, the more you can anticipate and think about what types of questions might come up. The other side of that is know your CV. Make sure you can talk to the points on your CV, and I guess it's always useful to have 1 or 2 examples that specifically relate to the job that you're interviewing for that you can easily recall on. And then the other thing I think, which maybe sometimes you wouldn't necessarily think about, but have a bit of background knowledge on the company and the industry. So I think when I was interviewing for F1, I did a bit of research on F1's history, both as a sport but also as a company. So we got taken over by Liberty back in 2017, and I interviewed the year after. So just being armed with kind of key knowledge about that company is always useful as well. And then the other thing in terms of preparation is it's always, I think, quite useful to find out who will be interviewing you. And I think this is something that I maybe would have shied away from, but I think when you get offered an interview, whether it's from the person directly or from an HR department, never shy away from asking who it is who will be interviewing you, because it always helps to, I guess, know who that is, know what their job title is, but from a comfort perspective to calm their nerves, if you can have a quick LinkedIn stalk and have a look at what they look like and make the face feel a bit more familiar before you go into the room, I think that helps as well. So yeah, they'd be kind of the main preparation points that I would look at for going into an interview.
There's some really, really good tips there. Louise, if you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think Sophie's right. Research. The company, the people, find out where they're going, where they've been, what their new objectives are, how you're going to fit into that part of the journey. Absolutely. Yeah, it's preparation.
Great. We've had a question from Sarah that says, does your department offer internships or any different experiences like that for young law graduates?
We have had a few interns from time to time, but it's sort of more for qualified lawyers. Given how busy we are, we don't have the time and resource to do training the way a law firm does, and that's the real benefit of being in a law firm for a young lawyer, is what they invest in training you up and teaching you the practical skills that law school doesn't necessarily teach. So I wouldn't say starting in-house is the best career move. I would say getting really great training and a really solid foundation somewhere who has the time and resource to give that to you before looking to what you'd like to do long term.
Fantastic. That's really good advice. There's lots of different things to think about. Obviously, it's not always the one set thing. There's lots of different routes around to get to where you want to go. I guess, Sophie, just before we wrap up, what about you? Does your department often advertise internships or work experience, or would you sort of recommend going down the agency route and things like that?
Yeah, I think I guess in commercial roles it's slightly different to a legal role, for example, where you don't necessarily need a specific qualification. So I think there have been times in the past where we do have internships or interns come on board to experience, I guess, the marketing side of things. I know that department does look at interns every so often, but I think outside of F1, touching on Louise's point before, if you are looking at motorsport, there are a lot of other companies out there outside of F1 who, on the commercial side of things anyway, would probably offer intern roles, short-term intern roles. So brands like the F1 teams, for example, or I guess even if just sport in general, so not soccer, football teams or rugby teams would have, those kinds of marketing, sponsorship, commercial exec internship programs.
That's great advice. And just to wrap things up, I'll go to Lucy first, but if you had to give sort of a one-line or a one sentence to anybody aspiring to work in Formula One, what would it be?
God, sorry, who are you going to? I thought you were going to Louise, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I did. Yeah, Louise?
I think it's think broad and think big. There's lots of ways you can be involved, and it may not be the pathway that you think straight up, but yes, there's lots of ways, lots of industries, lots of disciplines that you can be involved, and the sky's the limit on what you can do when you get there.
Great, that's really good. Sophie, what would yours be?
Yeah, I think I would say don't. It sounds quite cliched, I guess, but don't give up. I think that it can be tough out there, and it's, you know, rejection isn't always the easiest thing to take. But if you don't get one role, don't let that affect your motivation and your confidence. There will always be other roles out there, I guess, that will give you that route in. So yeah, I think that would be what I'd say. Don't give up, and always stay positive.
Great. Well, I think what's all that's left now for me to say thank you very, very much for everybody for joining. The chat has been filled with such positive comments, and it's lovely to see. So thank you very much, Louise and Sophie, for your time tonight. Just a couple of things to mention. We'll be back on the 15th of February for the next event, so be sure to join us then, and there will be a survey as well after all of the events given out. So thank you very, very much for joining, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, Helena. Thanks, everyone.